Hi, this is John Lineval from John Lineval Tutoring, and this is AP U.S. History video number 7, Geography and Regional Development in British North America, the New England Colonies. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. New England Colonies, Puritanism. New England developed as a sanctuary for Puritans, not as an economic venture, so that made it different from some of the other colonies. Puritanism came from Protestant Reformation. Namely, Martin Luther and John Calvin were both displeased with the Catholic Church, which really was the only Christian church up until the Protestant Reformation. Henry VIII wanted the holdings of the Catholic Church in England for himself, and he also wanted to be able to divorce his wife. So he started the Church of England by taking the church's holdings, etc. Since it wasn't really a theological difference that motivated it, Henry VIII didn't make the Church of England any different from the Catholic Church, which annoyed many. The Puritans were formed basically from a desire to, in quotes, purify the Church of England and abolish Catholic practices that they didn't like. And others, of course, just wanted a separate church from the Church of England. So that led to Puritanism and some religious tensions in England. Since there were religious differences, or a schism, if you will, in Europe, these hugely influenced the settlement patterns in the Americas. You can't really study American history without understanding these differences. So, as we mentioned before, the Puritans and the Church of England people really had problems with each other, and they literally fought wars over religion. For example, Oliver Cromwell led the Puritans and took over England for a while, but then fell out of power. And some of the things that happened when the Puritans were in charge probably really annoyed non-Puritan people in England, Great Britain, etc., such as this, in quotes, public notice. This is before there was standardized spelling in English, so it's public with a K on the end, notice. And you can see the obf. They have that fancy S that looks like an F, the observation, anyway, the observation of Christmas, having been deemed a sacrilege, the exchanging of gifts and greetings, dressing in fine clothing, feasting, dreffing, feasting, okay, I'll stop it. Dressing in fine clothing and feasting and similar satanical practices are hereby forbidden, with the offender liable for a fine of 5 shillings. So, calling celebrating Christmas an actual satanical practice. If Fox News wants to talk about a war on Christmas, here's a real war on Christmas. Anyway, the Puritans saw the writing on the wall, which is also a biblical reference in case you don't know that, and left England. Also, Catholics left for Maryland, Maryland, get it? That should be your first clue that it was meant as a refuge for Catholics. And the Great Migration was the 17th century pilgrims left for the colonies. That's not to be confused with the 20th century Great Migration of blacks from the rural South to U.S. cities for manufacturing jobs. That's a different Great Migration. Puritanism and its effects. The Puritans were very Calvinist. The salvation was part of a divine plan, not one's own moral merits, so of course that caused great anxiety and much time spent on piety that, I'm worthy of salvation because I must be part of the divine plan because look at me, I'm so pious and religious. Which strikes me as a little odd. If you're predestined to either go to heaven or go to hell, why would you bother with religion at all, since God's already made up his mind whether you're going to heaven or hell, and it doesn't really matter what you do? Just my opinion. If your opinion is different, that's fine too. Puritans did believe everyone had a calling of hard work to do, and a success in the material world meant that you were part of the, in quotes, elect that would go to heaven. So that would explain why people were supposed to work hard. Hard work for the community also ruled, since Puritans believed that God could punish the whole community for individual laziness or sinfulness, and Puritans also believed that they had a responsibility to take care of each other. The idea was also that if you were busy working in your workshop or in your farm field, you weren't in the tavern drinking or doing something else that was lazy or sinful, so it was much better to be industrious. Puritans emphasized the Old Testament idea of an angry, vengeful God and original sin, not the New Testament loving, forgiving God that Jesus taught about. Sobriety, industry, theft. So, okay. We see here's an old painting from Europe. It's called Beer Street. The idea was that drinking beer led to prosperousness, and people are all fat and happy and had lots of food and were making productive things, painting signs, etc. Whereas Gin Lane, which I haven't shown, people were drinking gin and was causing all sorts of problems, and people were dropping babies out of windows, etc. Anyway, coincidentally, the values of Puritanism were also the ones that generally lead to business success, thrift, industry. I mean hard work, not industry, like factories, and sobriety. So it was believed that industry would save you. Being in a workshop or a farm field, as I just said, would keep you out of the taverns. And here's an article to go look up about Puritanism and capitalism. And here's another way to put it, kind of being a goody two-shoe. Goody, I believe, stood for good wife back in those days. What do you like to do? Count how many seconds I've been better than you. Ha ha ha. All right, let's move on. And Plymouth and the Mayflower Compact. So we can see this was the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and from 1630 to 1691, province of Massachusetts Bay from 1691 to 1775. Notice that actually later on there would be territorial disputes between New York and Massachusetts, including things like what is now Western New York, like here's Buffalo, Niagara Falls, stuff like that. Originally, Massachusetts wanted that as well. But anyway, let's get back to what we're discussing. The Plymouth and the Mayflower Compact. A group of separatists, now known as Pilgrims, left England in 1608 for the Netherlands, which was tolerant and had many Calvinists. However, the leaders were concerned about material temptations in the Netherlands despite a lack of religious persecution. The leaders believed the rigors of establishing a colony in the New World would prepare the Pilgrims from an austere life of religious piety. William Bradford and the Pilgrim leaders were granted permission by the King of England to settle in land granted to the Virginia Company. They formed a joint stock company to pay for the trip. A bit more than 100 people landed at Cape Cod. So notice Virginia is down here. You can really only see the top of Virginia. And here is, Cape Cod, Massachusetts Bay. Oops, kind of made a mistake there. Whoops, wrong place. Cape Cod, Massachusetts was nowhere near Virginia, and the Pilgrims figured it out. They weren't great sailors, but they weren't stupid. So, as a result, the Pilgrims created the Mayflower Compact that called for orderly government based on the consent of the government. Notice that that's not democracy as we know it. You can see the book I Love Paul Revere, whether he rode or not. Certainly some classes of people were more important than others. The colony was to be ruled by the elite, and the document was intended to restrain people from leaving the colony or rebelling against the elite's authority, as cited by historian and Pilgrim Governor William Bradford. Plymouth struggled for the first year but got better, but it still failed to attract many more Puritans from England. Plymouth was minor compared to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but since it was first, it gets the most attention. And in case you're wondering, if you use the Barron's SAT book for the SAT, there is an excerpt from I Love Paul Revere, whether he rode or not. I think it's page 691 or something in there. Anyway, you can look it up, and it's actually kind of enlightening and entertaining. It dispels some of the myths about the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Anyway. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, a city on a hill. In the 1620s, many Puritans were ready to leave England. Charles I, encouraged by Archbishop William Laud, was eager to oppress the Puritans and other non-Church of England sects. So perhaps towards that end, Charles I granted a charter to the Massachusetts Bay Company to establish a colony in British North America, most likely near Massachusetts Bay, since it's called the Massachusetts Bay Company. Things usually make sense. The start of the Massachusetts Bay Colony at Salem. So the charter didn't set a headquarter for the colony, so it could be led from Massachusetts, not Britain, if the company wanted. Didn't say it had to be in London or anywhere in England, so okay, well, why don't we make the headquarters in Massachusetts, since it's the Massachusetts Bay Colony? And so the company ended up being highly autonomous, meaning independent, and John Winthrop led the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Winthrop gave a sermon called A Model of Christian Charity, Christian love, if you will, that is important in U.S. history. Before the Massachusetts Bay Colony ship, the Arabella, actually landed at what is now Salem, Massachusetts, in 1630. In his sermon, Winthrop called the colony a city set upon a hill and noted that the eyes of all people are upon us. Little egotistical, but hey, you want to inspire your colonists if you're starting a colony. The Great Migration and the Growth of New England. So again, this is not the blacks coming from the south to the industrial cities in the 20th century. This is the 1600s or the 17th century Puritans coming from England to Massachusetts. So the Massachusetts Bay Colony, centered at present-day Boston, struggled the first year it existed, but soon it was thriving. By 1640, and it quotes, great migration of more than 20,000 settlers came to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The settlers were middle-class, tradespeople and farmers, so they were able to do the work needed to make the colony thrive, like farm and build ships and build houses and blah, blah, blah. So they were a lot better off. Remember the Jamestown people, who were all not working class people who weren't able to do the trades effectively or didn't know when they had to do what and what they had to do. These guys made it because they were used to doing this kind of work in England. New Hampshire, which would later become the Granite state, of New Hampshire. Some Puritans did move north from Massachusetts to what is now the state of New Hampshire. They were already small English fishing villages there established in the 1620s. Massachusetts claimed New Hampshire as its own, and an agreement granted Massachusetts the right to New Hampshire in 1641, but a royal decree separated the two colonies in 1679. Church and state. Puritans were not for religious freedom except for themselves. This is a really easy mistake to make. You've probably heard the Puritans came to America to escape religious persecution since kindergarten, assuming that you grew up in the United States, and maybe if you didn't, you've heard this anyway. You also know the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution allows for freedom of religion, so it's really easy, and it's really easy for your kindergarten teacher, etc., to maybe even directly say something like, the Puritans wanted to come to a place where they could have their own religion, and that's why we have freedom of religion in the United States today, because of the Puritans. Wrong answer. No, you probably thought, oh, I get it, the Puritans fought for religious freedom, got it for themselves and everyone else, and that's why it's written in the First Amendment. No, the Puritans, much like many other religious sects that have found places to practice their religion freely, refused to allow the practice of other religions. It's unfortunate, it's very hypocritical, but a lot of minorities, once they find a place where they can be free, outside their homeland, oppress anybody else who comes to their new homeland, or oppresses the people who were already in their new homeland. So anyway, all Puritan colonies, except for Roger Williams's Rhode Island, were theocracies, theo meaning religion, crassy meaning rule. So they were literally ruled by religion, much like, say, Iran today. Rule by religion is generally pretty awful. Most of you watching this video would not want to go to a country that was ruled by any religion, including the religion that you may practice. If you don't believe me, well, move to one of those countries and find out. So, religious freedom, what you believe is not the problem, what you believe I should believe is the problem, or freedom of religion is also freedom from religion. Keep that in mind when you are studying your history and just, hey, when you're making any political or religious decision. Roger Williams and Rhode Island. Puritanism encouraged the rigorous individual study of Scripture, but only to the extent it conformed with their doctrine. Since people were educated, then told what they should think, that caused conflicts, because anybody who reads a book and then hears from somebody else, hey, this is what the book says, and it doesn't agree with what that person actually read in the book, that's going to be a problem. Especially when it's about something like religion. Well, the Bible doesn't really say that about God. You say that. What's the problem here? Why is there a difference? Why should I believe you? I've directly read the Word of God, which is the Bible, right? Okay, Roger Williams was a devout Puritan minister. Concerned about the mistreatment of Native Americans by Puritans, he was not too pleased with what was going on in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He believed the church also shouldn't be involved in civil government. His idea was that preachers should stick to religious matters, mostly because they were more important than everyday government, so that would distract the ministers from their much more important spiritual work. Of course, since civil government and the Puritan Church, as I said, were exactly the same thing in Massachusetts, it was a theocracy, that idea was extremely unpopular. And I'm sure a lot of the preachers said, well, but I like exercising authority in the civil world because it makes me really powerful and I get what I want. I think this Roger Williams guy is a troublemaker and a bit of a nut job. So, Roger Williams did look a lot like Jeff Spicoli, that is Sean Penn's character in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which we'll see in a second.
What Jefferson was saying was, hey, we left this England place because it was bogus. So if we don't get some cool rules ourselves, pronto, we'll just be bogus too. Yeah?
Very close, Jeff.
So I don't know, is this a coincidence or a glitch in the Matrix? And he's played by Sean Penn, like William Penn. Pennsylvania, the name of another colony. It's all a conspiracy. It's all part of the Matrix. This is all just a simulation. They're too lazy to come up with real names, or they thought we would notice. No, I'm kidding. It's not a conspiracy, but it just struck me as kind of funny. Anyway, the banishment of Anne Hutchinson. Anne Hutchinson was the center of an important theological dispute in New England's Puritan community. Hutchinson held meetings in her house with both men and women in a place and at a time where women were not supposed to instruct men. That's actually in the Bible, generally, that women are not supposed to instruct men. They're supposed to listen, not talk, etc. She took Puritanism to its extreme, stating that ministers were not needed since God would communicate directly to anyone who could read through the Bible. Kind of what I just told you before. She also believed that the Puritans had moved too far away from the idea of predestination and were teaching the heresy that salvation could be earned through works. Heresy, in case you don't know, means that you are supporting a religious belief that isn't supported by the religion you say that you're part of. So that's bad. That's going against your God, going against your religious teaching. So Anne Hutchinson was tried, banned, and excommunicated by John Winthrop and other Puritan leaders. She and her family left the Massachusetts Bay Colony for Rhode Island, then New Amsterdam. Remember, that's what New York was called before it was called New York, after her husband died. So you can go to this website, massmoments.org, Moment Details, for a lot more detail about Anne Hutchinson and her life and what she did and how she died, etc. I will also have this in the description below, so you can click on that. The Founding of Connecticut. Some Massachusetts Bay colonists wanted to be free of Governor John Winthrop, who's the same guy who banned Anne Hutchinson, or banished Anne Hutchinson. Reverend Thomas Hooker disagreed with Winthrop over who could be in the church. Hey, maybe that's where they get this saying, as nervous as a hooker in church. No, I'm kidding. Ha ha ha. Actually, the etymology of hooker, meaning the lady of the evening, came from a general whose name was Hooker, where a lot of these ladies followed his troops. But I digress. Anyway, Reverend Thomas Hooker disagreed with Winthrop over who could be in the church. Winthrop believed that new members must show they had a conversion experience, which we'll discuss again in a few minutes. Hooker believed that living a godly life was good enough to be admitted. That was still pretty rigorous and different, but these were both very rigorous things. You couldn't just say, hey, I want to be a Puritan. Hey, I want to be a member of the Congregationalist Church, which was the Puritans called their church. You had to really, really show them that you were someone who they wanted in their church. So in 1636, Hooker left Massachusetts for the Connecticut River Valley, founding Hartford, Connecticut. Other towns sprang up and joined Hartford in Connecticut, so they all became part of Connecticut. The Fundamental Orders of Connecticut were written and accepted in 1639. New Haven, the city that's the home of Yale University, joined in 1662. So here's a little plaque celebrating the life of Thomas Hooker. Okay. And notice they call him the father of American democracy here. So different people have different ideas about who founded democracy, maybe even what American democracy is. But anyway, whoever put this up said he was the father of American democracy. The splitting of Puritanism. By the end of the 1600s, that would be the 17th century. Remember, it's always one thing ahead, like we're in the 2000s, but it's the 21st century right now. There were problems in the Puritan colonies. The second and third generation Puritans in the United States, well, before it was the United States, in the American colonies, were seen as not as zealous, that is, not as strongly religious as the original colonists. By the 1650s, the church membership was declining. Perhaps economic demands were pulling people away from church, which is a bit ironic. Remember, Calvinism demanded hard work in business, so it's funny if they worked so hard that it actually took time away from their church duties. The problems with, or the splitting of Puritanism can be seen in the Halfway Covenant and the Salem witch trials. So the Halfway Covenant was something that came up because, as stated previously, new Puritan converts had to show they'd had a conversion experience. To be in the Congregational Church, the new name for the Puritan Church, the candidates had to convince the elders they'd experienced God working in their souls, which was not easy. I mean, you have to really show, wow, God really affected me, and it's caused me to have this great white lightning spiritual experience. Most people aren't going to be able to show that. I don't think you could ask the average person today who calls himself a Christian to say, did you have this blinding white light experience? Many people say, no, not really. I just think I want to be a good person and, da-da-da. Anyway, in 1662, the Congregational Church offered halfway membership to the children of their church members who could become partial or, in quotes, halfway non-voting members of the church even without a conversion experience. The Salem Witch Trials. In 1692, the Salem Witch Trials demonstrate a schism or a division in what used to be a unified Puritan community. However, in larger history, these trials were kind of the tail end of witch trials around the world that killed roughly 100,000 people over many centuries. But what happened here, in the United States in relatively modern times, of course, is going to matter more to us than something that happened in Europe in, let's say 692 instead of 1692. So we always care about things that happen closer to us in place, in distance, and in time, etc. So we care a little bit more about that. And people say, oh, that can't happen here. Well, it did happen here. So the first people who were accused were teenage girls. The witchcraft accusations meant that you were working with Satan. You were literally being accused of being a tool of Satan, and every bad thing, like a bad harvest, a stillborn child, etc., was either punishment by God because you're bad, and if you're not a bad person, well then, that must be Satan. Satan must be working through a witch who cast a spell on me, and that killed my kid, that caused my crops to fail. So men were very ready to turn on women and accuse them of witchcraft. The poor were ready to accuse the rich. Jealous of somebody? Hey, maybe they're a witch. Maybe that's why they're more successful than you. Woman turned you down? Hey, maybe she's a witch. Something like that. So this demonstrated huge problems in the society that probably most societies have. It's just most people can't accuse people of being witches and be taken seriously. Also, the government would seize the property of convicted witches, so one writer on a website we have here just characterized it as literally an extraordinary land grab done while the governor was out of town. So there was a huge incentive of the theocratic government to go and accuse people of witchcraft, have them convicted, take their land, etc. One of these things they talk about on this website is a man who was a landowner and his wife. They were convicted of witchcraft. They killed or sold all his cattle. They literally went to the tavern that he ran and drained all the taps. So, okay, big party with all the booze, all the beer, all the cider, and, hey, all right, we're going to have a great big barbecue, and, oh yeah, and we get his land, so now we're landowners, so we can sell that to people who want to vote, and we get more money. You can see the problem here. There were many incentives to falsely accuse someone of witchcraft here. The Salem witch trials continued. Note, ergotism may have well caused the cases of possession or witchcraft noted in the Salem witch trials. The summer of 1691 was unusually rainy, and stored grain and rye bread made from the stored grain could easily have become moldy with ergot fungus. Here we see some rye. You see all these black things? Those are basically ergot fungus. So that's infected with ergot. That can cause hallucinations. For example, LSD or acid was derived from ergot alkaloids. It is a synthetic, but it wouldn't be surprising if natural ergot alkaloids also cause hallucinations, especially if you ate enough of them. So ergot fungus infestation was so common in those days that people often just thought, yeah, those black things are part of the grain. That's always on there. What's wrong with you? Why wouldn't you eat that? Do you not like rye bread? Okay, well, guess what? That's all we have to eat, so you're going to have to eat it. Anyway, let's move on. Did you find this video useful? Please like it and subscribe to my channel. Neither action costs you anything, and you'll be alerted about my new videos. Why do I care? It's simple. YouTube doesn't let me share any ad revenue unless I have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of view time in a year. While many people are watching these, I don't have 4,000 hours of watch time in the last year. I still don't have 1,000 subscribers, but I'm getting pretty close. For the same reasons, you are not only welcome but encouraged to share links to this video, put in playlists, etc. And I'm always happy to read and respond to constructive criticism or suggestions for new videos. I reserve the right to delete comments from and block those who specialize in destructive criticism, trolls, or things that are off topic, spammers, disturbed people. You can also hire me for tutoring. You can hire me to work online, or you can hire me, with social distancing protocols in place and everything, to work with you anywhere in the San Francisco Bay Area, or we can discuss other issues involving travel, etc. if you want to hire me. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll give you my contact information on the next slide here. Contact me, Facebook, Instagram, email, phone. Facebook, you can reach me at facebook.com/Linneball Tutoring, all one word. Instagram, you can reach me at instagram.com/john.linneball.tutoring. Phone number 415-623-4251. You can also text me on that phone number because it's my cell phone. Email, john@johnlinneball.com. Website, johnlinneball.com or johnlinneballtutoring.com. Those both take you to the same website. Testpreparation.locals.com is my locals.com site. You can subscribe to that, and eventually I will have some exclusive content there. Going to be honest with you, don't have any exclusive content on there just yet. Mail, John Linneball Tutoring, 1859 Powell Street, number 109, San Francisco, California, 94133. Notice, finally, this is not a substitute for your classes, your text, etc. This video is based on Barron's AP United States History Review Book, 4th edition. It's also based on the Princeton Review AP U.S. History Exam, or Cracking the AP U.S. History Exam 2019 edition, and my general knowledge of U.S. history, plus whatever I can find online. While this should help you do well on the AP U.S. History exam, I can't be responsible for what your teacher thinks is important and ask you about in his or her own tests, homework, etc. Please read your class texts and pay attention to what your teacher says in class, because I don't know what your teacher is telling you in class or wants to test you on. All right. So, coming up soon, AP U.S. History Video 8, Geography and Regional Development in British North America, the Middle Colonies. Won't that be exciting? All right, have a nice day. Bye.